All right, well, thank you. As probably many people said, it's very unfortunate we are not in person. It would have been lovely to be in India. But so what are covered in these lectures is the split is roughly the following. So I'll first go over how the Lepton flavor is implemented in the standard model. So that will be probably the bulk of this first hour. Then we'll go over different observables. In there will be sprinkled some new physics examples. And then probably tomorrow we'll move from muons to taus and then the Higgs as a proper flavor. And then I will devote probably one lecture on what you can do if you're searching for light new physics, unlike most of the program, which is geared right now towards searching for heavy new physics. All right, so let's dive in. So today, the goal for today is I'll compare the leptonic sector in the standard model with the quark sector, where had lectures from UI, so we'll lean on those, but I will also repeat most of the, a lot of the things that he said so that we can compare more easily with my notation. And then we'll move on to these observables that are sensitive to lepton flavor violation. So I want to point out that there are some excellent introductions to flavor physics. So these general ones, there are quite a few. So there's dots, dots there. So first of all, I went over the UAS lectures, look pretty good. They follow a lot of that material is in this Grossman-Taneda review, which I highly recommend. It's excellent. Another set, which is great to be read over, it's from Yosinir. Okay, these are, the 5 years old lectures, but they are perfect, I think. There are some newer ones, including mine. And then for this particular course, for these lectures, there are 2 reviews, which are useful if you want to dive deeper, especially in the experimental parts, but also in the beyond the standard model examples. One is from Calibi Cironelli, and then a very recent one from Ardo and Pezzula. I think both of them are great. They cover slightly different things, so I put them out there. All right, so to physics. So as I said, the first lecture is devoted to comparing what you've seen for quarks mostly now with leptons. So if we look at the standard model structure, there are a few things that you notice that are different with leptons just from the measurements. So the first one is that leptons are much lighter than quarks, most of them. So if I pick, let's say, a lepton electron quarks, so definitely lighter. The other, what that translates to is that if we pick, let's say, a muon or a tau, there will be fewer kinematically open channels. No? So muon cannot decay to a kaon. Or I have an example here that, for instance, a B minus quark, a B minus meson, which contains a B quark, and a neutrino, but a tau D quark. So there are many examples like this. So the lighter you are, the less open channels you have. The other main difference is that quarks carry color. So they are bound inside hadrons, while leptons don't. So the theory behind it, calculating branching ratios, is usually much simpler. Then the other thing that is kind of interesting is that the up leptons, which are the neutrinos, here I put just the upper bounds. So the up leptons, the upper components of the doublets, are much, much lighter than the down leptons. So that's different than in the quark sector, where, for instance, you even have an example where the the up quark, let's say, is lighter than the D quark, and then the C quark, which is an up type quark, is heavier than the strange quark. Here, the neutrinos are much lighter. The other thing is to keep in mind is that the absolute scale for the neutrino masses is not known, but we know the mass differences squared, so the differences between the mass squared. And as I will show you in a few minutes, in many processes that we're interested in, the neutrino masses are completely irrelevant, so you can just neglect them. All right, so now let's go over a little bit of the structure. So in the standard model, where is this flavor structure residing? It's residing in this Yukawa couplings to the Higgs. So if you take the quarks, there are two Yukawa 3x3 matrices. So that's the Higgs here, the left-handed quark doublet, and then the right-handed down quark. Or if I have an upper-handed up quark, then there's the conjugated Higgs sitting there. All right, so we have two 3x3 complex matrices. Each of them you can diagonalize by doing a biunit transform. But the problem is that the left-handed quarks sit in a doublet. So these two transformations that you would need to do on the down and up quark matrix, they're tied together with through SU2L symmetry. So all you can do, unless you break the symmetry, is you transform the Q left, you transform the U right, and you transform the D right. And therefore, you would be, for instance, so that's the transformation, the corresponding transformation of the Yukawa matrices. And we can choose a basis, for instance, where the down Yukawas are diagonal. So we have YD now becomes a diagonal matrix with where you can make this YD, YSB, YB all real and positive. And then we're left over with a unitary matrix in front. That's the CK matrix. So it's unitary matrix, but not the most general one, as you all told you. There's a counting there that will remind you. Now, if we go back in this basis, the down Yukawas have this hierarchical structure. No? They correspond to the masses of the quarks. So the down quark is much lighter than the B quark. While in this basis, the up go add everything after the electric symmetry breaking. I don't have to keep the up and down quarks tied together. I can redefine what U left is with taking the CKM there. The matrix, the mass matrices will have a contribution that is from the Higgs wave. So I can write a Higgs dependent mass matrix, which will also give me the Higgs coupling. So now you see that all the Higgs couplings, of course, are proportional to the masses. And the Lagrangian, therefore, has in this mass basis where the up and down quarks are diagonal, it's here. So the Higgs couplings are proportional to the masses, and we move the CKM into the charge currents, while the neutral currents there in the kinetic term are all diagonal. All right, so to recap, no? All flavor violation in the mass basis was moved into the CKM, which sits in the charge currents. So even though the origin was these 3x3 complex matrices, we were able to move this into the currents. The reason why this is not just one is that there were two Yukawa matrices that were not diagonalized in the same basis with the same transformation. And then the neutral currents are flavor conserving. So no flavor violation in the couplings of the Z boson, and the couplings to the Higgs are also flavor diagonal. All right, so the CK matrix has a hierarchical structure, so almost one. And then there are three mixing angles in one phase. So three real parameters, one phase. So these are the physical parameters, as you were explained in the counting. This is not the most general unitary matrix. So you use, you only want to keep the physical parameters. And in this Wolfenstein parameterization, the real parameters are this amplitude A, the lambda, the expansion parameter, and then the rho parameter, and then there's one imaginary piece here that controls all CP violation in the CK matrix. All right, so in my boxes representation, so big entries on the diagonal for the CK matrix, and then they are successively smaller on the off diagonal. So 1, 2 entries, 0.2, and then you have lambda cubed here, lambda squared for the VCB. All right, so in pictures, let me recap. No? So that's maybe the most important thing is the neutral currents are flavor conserving at 3 levels, so photon, gluon, and the Z. So they have flavor generation universal interactions. So they're all for different generations, all these couplings are exactly the same. Higgs has flavor diagonal interactions in the standard model. They are flavor diagonal, but they're not flavor universal. So Higgs couples less to the light generation than it does to the third generation. These couplings are proportional to the masses of the fermions. And then the charge currents are flavor changing, right? So there's the CK matrix, which has this hierarchical structure with almost 1 entries on the diagonal, and then there are these off-diagonal pieces that are successively smaller and smaller the further away you go from the first generation. All right, so that was a lightning review of the flavor structure of the quark sector in the standard model. So what happens if we look at the leptonic sector? So first, we'll just take the neutrino masses to 0 so that they're very small. So let's just keep them at 0. That's a very good approximation in many of the experiments. So if you have a collider experiment, meson decays, charged lepton decays, this will be a great approximation because in those processes, the energy release, the energy exchange is much, much bigger than the neutrino mass. So you will just be able to work with massless neutrinos. All right, so what happens in this limit? So there's only one Yukawa in the standard model. That's the one, no? So you have a left-handed tablets for the leptons, and then there's the right-handed leptons. So that's all there is at the dimension 4. And you see that since now we only have one 3x3 complex matrix, we can use a field redefinition. So the unitary transformation on the left-handed fields and the right-handed fields, such that this 3x3 matrix is made diagonal. So that's the main difference. Before, with the quarks, there were 2 matrices, now it's just 1. And since it's just 1, we can do a biunitary transformation, make it diagonal with the entries, so the Yukawa coupling for the electron, muon, and tau, all real and positive. All right, so what does that mean? So since this matrix, the physical parameters are diagonal, there is no flavor violation in the neutrino, the massless neutrino limit. So no flavor violation unless we will be sensitive to these neutrino masses. Since it's real, there's no CP violation in the standard model in the leptonic sector unless you introduce the neutrino masses. And as before, the lepton Yukawa matrix is hierarchical. So the tau lepton is heavier than the muon, is heavier than the electron. So it's a highly hierarchical. All right, so so in the standard model, with massless neutrino, there are no leptonic flavor changing neutral currents. So that what that means is that the photon coupling to the charged leptons, the Z couplings to the leptons, and the Higgs coupling to the leptons, they're all I should not say they're flavor diagonal. These guys are flavor diagonal. The Higgs is flavor diagonal but not universal, proportional to the lepton masses. So these three are flavor diagonal. While the charge currents, unlike in the quark sector, they're also now flavor universal. Right? So that's the big change, is there's no flavor changing currents in the leptonic sector unless we keep track of the neutrino masses. All right, so what's now the prediction for the flavor violating decays? Well, they're zero. So if I take a muon that decays to 3 leptons, to 3 electrons, so that's flavor changing. I go from the leptonic muon number to a net electron number. It breaks the flavor, so it's zero in the massless limit. The same from mu to E gamma, tau to 3 electrons, tau to mu rho, and so on. There are many modes that you can write out. They're all zero, but if I open a PDG, it's pretty well obeyed with what you see. So these are the bounds on the these particular modes. They're very severe. They're very strong. So when experimentally we know, that there's the standard model is obeyed. No, it's smaller than 10 to the minus 12, 10 to the minus 13. All right. Now the neutrino masses are non-zero. So at some level, we should start seeing these flavor changing currents, so flavor changing contributions. So how much does this matter that the neutrino masses are non-zero? Well, in these experiments that we'll be interested in, so the case of tau and muon, it's a small correction. Why? Because all the way it should enter as the sum neutrino mass over the energy released to some power. Now, if I take, let's say, the upper bound of the neutrino mass divided by the muon, it's already a small number. So 10 to the minus 9, smaller than 10 to the minus 9. So you see that all this correction will be extremely small. All right, so let's take one concrete example and work this out. So in order to do that, I need to go over how the neutrino masses can be introduced in the standard model. So there are two ways. So the first observation that we already used, but I didn't say it in these words, is that if we take this QDL, Kado field content, then the gauge interactions forbid the neutrino masses, right? So that was the fact that you could not write a neutrino mass coupling, the equivalent of the up quark Yukawa. You could not write the same thing for the neutrinos in the standard model. You can write it if you introduce an extra set of fields, right-handed neutrino fields, that are singlets under the standard model gauge group. And if we assume that also the lepton number is conserved, the total lepton number is conserved, that's what we will end up with the Dirac neutrinos. So on top of the charged lepton Yukawa, there's also a neutrino lepton Yukawa, and that's it. No? So now everything is exactly the same as it was in the quark sector. We have two 3x3 complex matrices. They're general, completely general. In general, you can't diagonalize them at the same time. So YL and Y nu will not be diagonal in the same basis. And we'll end up with a mixing matrix with 3 angles and 1 CP phase, the same as the CKM matrix. Now, that's not the only option. So the other option is that instead of introducing the right-handed neutrinos and demand that the lepton number is conserved, we introduce instead higher dimensional non-renormalizable operator as an effective description. So that's the dimension 5 Weinberg operator, which, however, breaks the Lepton number by 2 units. So maybe this is a more involved notation. So in 4 components, it looks a bit strange now. So what is written here is taking the use of the fact that H times L, so H field is a scalar, doublet L is a fermion doublet. They have exactly the same standard model gauge numbers. So H and L you can combine in a way that is a standard model gauge singlet. And then the 2 fermions that are in the same representation of the Lorentz group, you can combine them to form a singlet. So it's the same as taking a spin 1/2 field with another spin 1/2. I can construct a spin 0 object. It's the same, but copied for the Lorentz group. So with, you see, with Higgs and the left-handed that we can construct an object that is a gauge singlet and a Lorentz singlet. So you can now put this into Lagrangian, but it is dimension 5. Now there's one extra Higgs that we needed to insert here. So there is a scale associated with it, and then a 3×3 complex matrix that is symmetric. I can exchange the I and J labels here. Not super easy to see in this annotation with a bar and a C. All right, so the main thing is that it's slightly different, no? So here I had the completely general 3×3 complex matrix and 2 sets of fields. In the other example, the Majorana neutrinos, it's a symmetric 3×3 complex matrix, but the transformations will have to be the same, no? So it will be a different diagonalization procedure because I have left-handed and left-handed fermions. All right, so the counting of physical parameters is slightly different. I won't go over it. But in both cases, what you will end up with is a mass basis related to the Flavour basis. So there will be some transformation where the Flavour basis fields will be related to the mass basis neutrinos through a 3×3 matrix called the PMNS matrix. And in the 2 cases, it takes the following forms. In both cases, there's 3 mixing angles and 1 phase. And then there's an extra piece here, which is just an identity matrix for Dirac neutrinos. So you recognize that this Pontecorvo, Maki, Nakagawa, Sakata, PMNS matrix then is exactly the same as the CKM matrix in the quark sector, just different angles and a different CP violating phase, right? But otherwise, it's exactly the same form. Now, if we have Majorana neutrinos, as I said, the counting of physical parameters is slightly different, and there are 2 extra phases that are left over. You can move them into this diagonal 3×3 matrix, and these are these 2 phases. They're just called alpha 2-1, alpha 3-1. So they're only non-zero if we have Majorana neutrinos. All right. Okay. So experimentally, what are the numbers? So first of all, the neutrino masses are very small, and also the absolute scale and ordering is not known. So I'll just copy the numbers for the case where you assume that the 3rd generation is heavier than the 2nd is heavier than the 1st. Then the mass splitting here between the first 2 is at the milli-electron volt, and between the 3rd and the first 2 generations is about 50 times bigger, so 50 milli-electron volts. The mixing angles are big. They're all order 1 or order 1-ish. with this theta 1,3 maybe 0.2, 0.15. The CP phases, it's not known whether they're zero or non-zero, both for the Dirac, so the PMNS phase, and the Majorana phases. All right, so the recap, if we look back at the quark sector, the mixing matrix was very hierarchical with order 1 couplings on the diagonal and then successively smaller. Here it just looks more anarchic, no? So it's just order 1 everywhere, maybe a little bit of structure there. All right, so that was the needed introduction. So now let's go back to our problem. So we said we want to know precisely how big these transitions are, the mu to E gamma, mu to 3E, and so on. All right, so we already know that this mu to E gamma will vanish in the standard model if we take the neutrino masses to be 0. In other words, since these neutrino masses are small, we know that the gene mechanism will be very effective. They have to be suppressed by the neutrino masses, and they're very small. So they will be very small, very unlikely transitions. All right, so they will be proportional to the neutrino masses squared, so very small. So the same as you saw in the quark sector, no? It comes with 2 insertions of the fermions running in the loops. Let me look at the diagram. So we start with the muon neutrino, end up with the electron neutrino, and you go from the muon to some neutrino flavor. So there will be U mu k, and then the PMNS matrix takes me back to the electron, but now with U e k, complex conjugated. And in order to probe the left-handed part, I have to put in 2 insertions of the mass matrix. No? So I'll go from left-handed to right-handed coupling if I insert the neutrino mass, and then another insertion for going from right-handed to left-handed, and the W couples only to the left-handed current. Let's see. All right, so 2 insertions of the neutrino mass, keeping all the prefactors in front. The branching ratio is for mu to E gamma. I don't know what. See why it disappear. Okay, so the branching ratio for mu to E gamma. So taking the decay width for mu to E gamma and divide it with the dominant standard model decay. So mu to E mu nu var will have a prefactor. So the prefactor is also what you would expect. Alpha is E squared over 4 pi. So we have the 2 extra what's going on? So 2 extra couplings for so 2 extra gauge couplings compared to the 3-level one, and then there's a loop factor 16 pi squared. That's the loop factor in front, and then the exactly this factor that we figure out. No, so a neutrino mass insertion that takes care of the fact that the gene mechanism is effective. So it has to start with non-zero insertions of neutrino mass, and I need 2 of them to have the right chirality structure for this loop diagram, divided by the weak scale. No? So if I take the WMS to be heavier, this should go to 0. All right. So how big is it? You put in the PMNS matrix, some values for the neutrino mass. So let's be go at the upper allowed level and the lowest allowed level, and you end up at the 10 to the minus 54, 55 level for the branching ratio from mu to E gamma. Okay, so that's a crazily small number. No, this is 40 orders of magnitude lower than the experimental bounds present. So it's 0. So for all practical purposes, from now till forever, this is 0. A similar suppression will apply if you do the same exercise for the other decays. So mu to 3e, tau to 3 mu, mu to e, and so on. Mu to e conversion. All right, so the punchline here is, for all practical purposes, the flavor violating transitions are with the leptons are 0 in the standard model. So if you find a non-zero signal, that's a clear signal of new physics. All right, so let's look at one example where mu to e gamma would not be so suppressed. So we kind of are halfway there already. So we'll look at the seesaw model for the neutrino masses. So let's say that we introduce this right-handed neutrino. So we have Kado field content plus the right-handed neutrino, which is the standard model singlet. But instead of demanding that the lepton number is conserved, we allow for any operator that is Lorentz and the gate singlets to be written down. So on top of the Higgs coupling, apologies, I changed the Higgs denotation. So this phi is the same as h. Phi tilde is the same as hc. So on top of the Yukawa term, which takes you from the right-handed neutrinos to the left-handed doublets, lepton doublets, there's also a Marana term that we can write down. So that these guys are gate singlets, but they are also just the Dirac, so they're just Y fermions. So the same way as before, if I have a spin 1/2 fermion, I can do a spin 1/2 times spin 1/2 gives me a spin 0. Translate this to the Lorentz group, and you can do the same thing. So you can take a Y fermion and another Y fermion and construct a scalar out of it. That's this 3x3 mass matrix. There are three generations of right-handed neutrinos assumed here. And they break lepton number by 2 units. Right? So that's the difference between what I said before. No? If you demand that the lepton number is conserved, then this piece is gone. And we have the Dirac fermions, Dirac neutrinos. So the seesaw here is that has a structure of a mass matrix in the right-handed sector, and then there is mixing between the left-handed and right-handed neutrinos. So we'll assume that this MR is much bigger than the Yukawas. In that case, the mass spectrum will consist of the following. So in all cases, this will be 6 Majorana neutrinos. If I assume that MR is bigger than what you get for the Dirac matrices, we'll have 3 heavy states, which will be mostly right-handed neutrinos, and they'll have masses of order MR when you diagonalize it. And then there are 3 light neutrinos. They're mostly left-handed mu Ls, and the mass matrix has this form. So 2 insertions of the neutrino mass, the Dirac mass matrix, 1 over MR. That's the seesaw. No? So if you take MR bigger, then the neutrino masses will be smaller. So that's the seesaw. All right, so the thing to remember is that since M nu needs to be symmetric, there is Y nu transpose Y nu. So that will be important for us later. All right, so what's the consequence for mu to E gamma? All right, so since this left-handed and right-handed neutrinos mix, the change compared to the case where we had just the Weinberg operator, so just assume that the left-handed neutrinos are Majorana. The change is that this PMS matrix does not diagonalize the full mass matrix. And so instead of having just 3 Majorana fermions, we now have 6 of them. So there's a 6x6 mass matrix. And the mixing matrix that enters the the WL new vertex is no longer the PMNS, but this curly U, which gets an extra correction from the presence of the right-handed neutrino. So there will be an extra piece here that would vanish if I take MR to infinity, as it should. Now then we're back into the Majorana neutrino case without this presence of the right-handed neutrinos. And you see that they're in here. So this is now 3 by 3. U was a 3 by 3 unitary matrix. But there's an extra piece here that is not unitary, and it has a structure which is Y nu dagger. So slightly different, sounds completely innocuous. However, because of this difference, the mu2 E gamma does not need to be so small. All right, so let's go over this. So there were the following change, no? So this max mixing matrix U is no longer unitary. So instead of having the G mechanism, which have a sum over the going to 0, when I have just a constant in the loop factor, so that the piece that is left is the M nu over MW squared. So that was for the PMNS matrix. Now we have to keep this constant piece. So we end up with a contribution here in the sum, right? For mu2 E gamma, we end up with a contribution which is not suppressed by the neutrino mass. Right? So there will be, in principle, a contribution that is not suppressed by the neutrino mass. It still has the structure of Y nu squared. However, you can make the Y nu matrix such that you will have small Y nu transpose Y nu and a big Y nu dagger Y nu. All right, it's not super, it's not generic, but you can write a structure like this. All right, so the punchline is the G mechanism is no longer fully operational if you have ingredients beyond the standard model. And we looked at the simplest example where we just looked at the effect of the right-handed neutrinos in the CISA model. And this branch, therefore, this branching ratio mu2 E gamma does not need to be suppressed by the light neutrino masses, but can be much larger at the limit of the present experimental sensitivity. All right, so let's look at so now the next thing we'll do is we'll look at different probes for the lepton flavor violating observables. If I translate this in terms of the scale that is being probed, this figure here has many different probes. So from the quark sector observables, so epsilon k, that's the delta mk, delta mb, delta mbs. I think you covered at least some of those. The scales you see are high, so 10 to the 3 to 10 to the 6 TeV. Comparable, there's comparable sensitivity from the charged lepton flavor violating decays. Mu2 E gamma, mu2 3, mu2 En, tau to mu gamma. They differ depending on which probe you take. The darker shaded regions are the projections. The lighter regions are the present sensitivities. Then there are also CP violating ones. So the neutron electric dipole moment, the electron electric dipole moment. So here it's the same story. So that's the darker is the projections. This is the present. And then the Higgs decay, so Higgs to mu E, Higgs to tau mu. We'll look at the probes that are circled in blue. And then there are also, let's say, top flavor changing decays and the direct searches, so the LHC or the electroweak precision tests. All right, so the what was done is the couplings to new physics were assumed all of them to be order 1. So that's how you get this big reach. if you assume that the flavor structure in new physics is the same as in the standard model, so that it has this very hierarchical structure, then you get these dashed hatched regions. And you see that then in that case, the reach of this indirect probe is roughly comparable to these direct searches at the LHC. All right, so for today, or actually the rest of these lectures, we'll really go over these observables and try to understand what is going on. All right, so let's say, so the charge lepton flare violating transitions are mu to gamma, tau to mu gamma, mu to 3e, mu to inconversion.
So Jure, could I just ask a question a minute? Actually,
yes.
it goes back a little bit. So
yeah.
when you were doing the basic, I think it was slide 14. Actually, I can't remember exactly.
Way back. Okay.
Yeah. No, this slide, the one next. No, a few ahead, 16. Then no, one more. I think this one here. I think. Yeah. So when you do the neutrino mass with Dirac neutrinos, right? That right-handed inserted one is completely sterile. Is that correct? Or how? When you? So, so that's the question. I just wanted to check that I'd remembered correctly. So this one has no observable effect apart from generating the mass, right? In terms of the standard model.
Yes, that's correct. So I mean, exactly. So in this case, you'll just have a right-handed star neutrino. So it's a gate singlet, and on top of it, you demand that the lepton number is conserved. So if that's the case, there's basically nothing you can probe. I mean, it's going to be super tough, no? Because any measurement that you can try to think of will be suppressed by the neutrino mass.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, which is different than if you allow for this Majorana mass term for the right-handed neutrino, at least you gain that then there are observable effects that are not necessarily suppressed by the neutrino mass. Right? So this is maybe not so. So parametrically, they will always come with the y nu insertion. So that was this. Maybe this was, I realized maybe it was a bit vague how this came about, but I thought it was still useful. No?
Yeah.
So you see, the way you talk to the right-handed sectors, you will always pay an insertion of y nu. Like your left-handed guy now is the thing that couples to the gauge boson, so that's how you create the left-handed neutrino, right? And then you'll need to talk to the right-handed sectors. You always pay an insertion of y nu to create a right-handed guy, right? It's always there. The question is, does this always translate to the neutrino mass? And the answer is no. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of sounds like there's a trick I put on you, but it has to do with the fact that you are looking at the observable. So these currents where you have a W, it's you take a barred left-handed to an L. So there's a complex conjugation that you perform, which is not present when you write down the neutrino mass here. No, so the notation is not the best, but I didn't dare to put the two-component notation. All right, so the new RC means that I did a complex conjugate of new R, and you multiply by a gamma 2, right? Doesn't matter, but it's the complex conjugate is important. And the same complex conjugate is in the bar, okay? So you see that you have two fields which are in the same Lorentz group representation, no? That are being, that are together, no? In the, in here, you see you have new right bar. And it's all about this. All right, it's like a nitty small detail. It sounds like it's a small detail, but actually it boils down to the fact that at least in principle, there are these two processes generating the neutrino mass and creating a right-handed neutrino from the standard model gauge interactions they're not suppressed by exactly the same structure, no? So they are suppressed in one case by y nu transpose y nu, and in the other case, it's y nu dagger y nu. That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
So parametrically, it's the same thing. No? So if I say this MR is huge, 10 to the 15 GeV, this is order 1, it's all gonna be small. No? However, if MR is 1 TeV, these are small numbers, smallish numbers. No? But you will have a principal, an observable effect in the mu2 E gamma and small neutrino masses. Okay.
Yeah.
But it has to have a very particular structure, no, to take advantage of this dagger versus the transpose.
Okay, so just one follow up on that. So, how many orders of magnitude can it enhance the branching fraction once you've added the?
Yeah, I realized I should have maybe I'll put it for tomorrow. You can just take a system model where you will saturate the bounds, so you can do that. So up to the experimental present bounds.
Okay.
Maybe I'll come back to this when I talk about tau to mu gamma. I'll give you an example. Maybe I can do that.
Okay.
It's a good point. Yeah.
Thank you, Jure. Sorry,
yeah.
I should like to interrupt you.
No, it's very good. It's very good. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it was needed. I also don't see the faces. It's a bit hard to understand what the silence means. It's fine. Yeah.
Others should also ask. They can ask in the chat also if they wish to, and we're following the chat. So.
Yeah, I also can see the chat actually, I think.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Good. Yeah. So, all right. So, long story short, no. So, we say that we have a null search here. So, any signal that you see that is not just an experimental problem. No? So, any real signal that you see, it's new physics. No? For the charged Lepton Flavor violation probe. So, I'll go over those in the next lecture. So tomorrow I hope to maybe give you something about the electric dipole quickly, and then also the Higgs decays. All right, so for today, I'll go over this Lepton Flavor violating muon decays, and then tomorrow I said all the other probes. So I think one thing that is really striking here is that there's been, so that's a log plot. There's been a huge improvements, decades, orders of magnitude improvements in the experimental progress. So this starts in 1940s, and we're roughly here. So that's all the present bounds, and there's going to be, as you'll see, a huge projected jump, let's say in this region over there. The color coding is the red is mu to E gamma. This green is the muon conversion on inside the field of the nucleons. So take a muon, get it close to the nucleus, it will convert to the electron if you have new physics, or you just look at the decay of mu to 3, so E plus E minus in an electron. So that's in blue. So the first in 1940s up to 50s, these were just using cosmic rays. And you see, okay, we're at the 10 to the minus 1, 10 to the minus 2 level. And there's a qualitative jump, a really big jump. Once you start using stopped pion beams, and another group here, no? So when you again make a big improvement, once you start using stopped muon beams. And I think to really appreciate this is right now we're looking at the planned experiments or experiments that are starting to come online that will go to 10 to the minus 15 up to 10 to the minus 18 level. I mean, it's incredible. And how rare is this? It's really, I think it's good to understand. So if you just use your hand, so we're being hit by the cosmic rays all the time. So there's about 1 muon per centimeter squared per minute from the cosmic rays. So there's one cosmic ray muon at sea level that passes through through a centimeter squared patch. So about 1 muon per second passes through your hand. In order to collect a sample like this, just by waiting for the cosmic muons to arrive at your hands, it will take longer than the lifetime of the universe. So it takes more than 10 billion years to collect these samples. So clearly we need beams, and we need very intense beams to do this. So there are 3 labs that are doing this. The PSI, Paul Scherrer Institute, this green dot in Switzerland, Fermilab, so just down the road from us, I mean, okay, a few hours drive. And then in KK in Japan, and J Park. So Japan has another set of experiments. So the planned experiments that are basically coming online right now are MEC2. So that will be mu to E gamma measurement. The mu to 3E, so that will measure, so that's MEC2 is at PSI, mu to 3E also at PSI, mu to E plus E minus E plus. So that it's a coincidence measurement and it's a continuous beam because you need to minimize the accidental backgrounds. Fermilab has a mu to E conversion. Another set of experiments that's mu to E. Another set of experiments is at J Park called DME and Comet. So they use pulsed beams, and I'll talk about more about what's going on there. And then Belle II has a program of also a tau physics. So tau to 3 mu, tau to mu gamma will be done by Belle. Tau to 3 muons can also be done at LHC, which is not plotted here. All right, so maybe we take, maybe just one more. So the timeline, I tried to find a more recent timeline. It's not easy to understand actually. So this is from pre-COVID. So everything got shifted by at least 2 years, more or less. But so it's basically now, no? All these experiments are kind of coming online now, which really are being built, or there's already engineering runs done, or actually even physics data taking being done. And then there's a really it's exciting experimental program that will keep on going for 2 decades or so. No? So mu to En, so mu to E conversion, mu to 3E, mu to E gamma, with different approved experiments or proposed experiments. So now maybe I take a break of 5 minutes and we come back at no, not allowed. So 6:30 your time.
Yep, that'll be 6:30.
Yeah,
okay, so yeah, we take a short break. Thanks.
Should we continue?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so all right, so in this second part of today, I'll just go over these 3 observables, and we'll look both at the theory and the experimental side of it. So I'll just go over the 3 consecutively, starting with mu to E gamma. All right, so the present bound, it comes from MEC experiment at PSI, so Paul Scherrer Institute in Switzerland, and it's at 4 times 10 to the minus 13. Oh. The future experiment is MEC2. It's the upgrade of the MEC experiment, and they just started the physics data taking. And they will improve by an order of magnitude the bound. That's the plan. All right, so let's look at the theory side of it. So let's assume that this is heavy new physics that will be responsible for the mu to E gamma transition. So then we can integrate out this new physics, and we'll end up with a standard model effective field theory. So what that means is that we take the standard model Lagrangian and we just write a higher dimensional operator. So they will start, the expansion will start at dimension 5. There will be a dimensionless Wilson coefficient sitting in front of each operator. And then 1 over a dimension for quantity, this lambda, you can think of as the new physics scale if all couplings are order 1. So if all couplings of new physics to the standard model are order 1, this will be basically the mass of the new physics, the mediators. Then there's dimension 6, similar story. So this will have now, since it's dimension 6, it will have a dimension 4 coupling in front, which is 1 over lambda squared. If all the couplings to new physics are order 1, this lambda here is the typical new physics scale. So mu to E gamma is gonna be, in this description, is gonna be due to a dimension 6 operator that is has the following form. So I already wrote it down in the electroweak broken phase, where the Higgs here was already set to its value, so the vacuum expectation value of V. It has is correlative flipping, so it takes a right-handed lepton and converts it to a left-handed lepton, and that's the photon, so the electromagnetic field strength with the sigma mu nu structure. So it has to be, it cannot be a dimension 4 because we said that there are, in the standard model, couplings to photons are all Flavour diagonal. The first term that is couples leptons to photons, it starts at dimension 6 because the left-handed and right-handed leptons have different gauge numbers. This guy is in a doublet. The right-handed is in a SU2L singlet. So we need a Higgs field to make this a gauge singlet. So what's in front is a loop factor, because this will be a result of a loop. So it will, if we have new physics running in the loop, I don't know if I have a picture. No. Next, just in a second. So if it runs in a loop, there will be 1 over 16 pi squared. So this lambda ij sitting in here is the expected new physics scale. Converting the experimental bounds from the previous slide, we get that the mu to E gamma, the bound on the mu to E gamma branching ratio gives lambda to 1. So that's the Flavour indices. So from mu to E, lambda to 1. The scale suppression here is about 3,500 dB. So a huge suppression. So we probe very high scales. If we have order 1 couplings to the standard model of new physics with this loop factor included. All right, so so how common is this? So basically any state that has a Flavour violating coupling, so any new physics state that has Flavour violating coupling to standard model leptons will contribute to mu to E gamma necessarily, because we start with a charge, so some charge thing, mu minus, mu plus, we end up with E plus here. So in this loop, there has to be charge states running in the loop. Since there are charge states running in the loop, the photon couples to them. So as soon as we have mu coupling to something, new physics, there is a mu to E gamma generated. So that's why these probes are very severe bounds, pose very severe bounds on new physics models, is because you need to make sure that there is no Flavour violation in the model. Right? So there has to be a reason why these are small if new physics is around the corner. It has anything to do with the electroweak symmetry breaking, for instance, so V-ish. So what I have here are 2 examples. For instance, just in figures. So neutrino mass models which are will generate mu2 E gamma. One example we already saw was the seesaw, where we put in the right-handed neutrinos, and the charge state was the W. So that was in the loop before, no? That we went over. So seesaw would have a photon coupling to W. There are other neutrino mass models. For instance, you can imagine that the neutrino masses are so small because you will generate them at loop level, so not through this the mixing with the right-handed neutrinos, but a more complicated structure like this. So there's you have some charge states maybe, and another set of right-handed neutrinos that will give you through consecutive loop structure the right structure of the neutrino masses. Since you have charge states, you'll get a mu2 E gamma. The important thing here is that you can enhance these mu2 E gamma transitions if you are able to have chirality flipping occurring on the internal lines. So this will result in very severe bounce because you will have a mass insertion that is coming from the heavy states. Then the other example here are, for instance, in 2 Higgs doublet models, you will have either the lepton and Higgs states, including the charged Higgs, contributing, and the photon can couple to the lepton line or to the charged Higgs. There's a two-loop contribution here, the Browder Z diagram, that is of the same size parametrically in many cases, because you can have a top loop that gives you the chirality flipping. So you will have a top mass insertion, which is much bigger than the chirality flipping on the lepton line. So this is lepton mass suppressed, and this is you get lifted suppression, but it's at two loops. Then there's more low energy supersymmetry, extra dimensional models. So basically, in any new physics model where you modify the lepton sector, you will have a constraint from mu2 E gamma unless you make sure that it is not present. So you would put the symmetry there to forbid it. So you need to forbid it. It's a very severe constraint. Okay, so let's say if we look at the experiments, so what is measured and what is being used? So one thing that we see is that this mu2 E gamma, it's a two-body decay, right? So both the electron and the photon are monochromatic in the rest frame of the muon. So if you are able to go to the rest frame of the muon, you will see a monochromatic electron and a monochromatic photon of the same energy, roughly the half of the muon mass. So taking the electron to be massless, this will be half of the muon mass, so about 53 MeV. All right, so what that means is that it's convenient to use stopped muons. So if you stop muons in the target, the left frame is the rest frame of the muon, and you will end up with this monochromatic electrons and photons. Now, now you want to use the mu plus, because when you stop the muon in the target, you don't want it to get bound to the nucleus. You just want it to get stopped. If it's bound to the nucleus, it will be still have be in the orbit. So it's not the muon. It's mu ion, so the muon is not stopped if it's found in the orbit with the nucleus. And this would spread the energy of the outgoing electron and photon. So you don't want that. Therefore, what's being used are the mu plus. So the measured process is really mu plus goes to E plus, so the positron and the photons. And then the muons are stopped in the thinnest possible targets. So that's mu plus goes to E plus, and a photon is the signal. When the electron goes out of the target, you don't want it to have to pass through a lot of material. So you want to avoid losing any energy, or as little energy as possible. Now, what are the backgrounds? Well, the backgrounds, there's an unavoidable one, which is the radiative muon decay. So the usual, so the three-level decay is going to be mu plus goes to E plus mu E nu mu bar. If you emit an extra photon, that looks pretty similar to the signal, except that you have these extra neutrinos that escape the detector. So as long as you measure all the energy that is being deposited, make sure that you don't have any escaping energy. You can reduce the bound, this intrinsic, the contribution from this radiative muon decay. And then there are accidental backgrounds, where you have just photons from something, so some other process, and then you have the three-level decay, mu plus E plus to mu E nu mu bar, and then you combine a photon accidentally with the positron, and it gives you exactly the muon mass when you combine the two. Right? So those you have to design the experiment to make it as small as possible. This is physics. So the only way you can make them irrelevant is by measuring as precisely as possible the energies and making sure that this positron and photon, so especially the positron, doesn't lose energy when it goes out of the detector. So you want to have the muon stopped in the thinnest possible targets. And then the experiment is that you search for a monochromatic line at the kinematical edge of the standard model decay. So that's the standard model decay, looks like this. That's called the Michel spectrum. So the dotted and the solid lines are this would be the three-level prediction. Now, if you include the radiative decay, so the radiative correction, so the one-loop correction plus emission of the photon, it gets smeared. Of course, there's still the kinematical edge. So when is this kinematical edge reached? Is when you have muon decay to an electron, and then the mu E nu mu go back to back. So the same topology is here, except instead of the photon, you have the mu E nu mu bar going in the opposite direction of the electron, of the positron. That's the highest energy that the positron can have, right? So that's here. So the signal is here, on the edge of this steeply falling background. You will need to measure the mu to E gamma. Of course, on top of the positron, you also have the photon, right? All right, so it requires the coincidence of the photon of the same energy. And as I said already, the energy resolution is very important to reduce the standard model background. So he wants to reduce this as much as possible by measuring as precisely as possible in this region the outgoing decay modes. All right, so mu to 3e. So mu to 3e is different from the mu to E gamma in the following way. So, okay, clearly now I start with a muon, and then I have three charged particles. So experimentally, it will be a different thing to measure. But also the new physics that generates it enters in a slightly different way. So there are kind of two types of contributions that are possible. The first one is the one that we already saw. So I can have some stuff running in the loop, I took exactly the same, this one loop mu, so a neutrino model as an example. So I have some charge states running in the loop, some stereo states running in the loop. The photon attaches to the charge state. And then instead of just seeing a photon, this converts, decays. It's an offshore photon that then decays E plus. For it, you can box diagram like this. So you can have now a contribution where instead of having a photon, you directly couple to the leptons, and you have a box diagram with the star and the charge states. Some of these couplings are flavor violating, so I'll have, let's say, a muon converts to an E charge, this E plus, and then I have E plus, E minus coupling on this other side. So I'll have mu to 3E generated by a box diagram. So these types of contributions are also possible. We just have a 3-level exchange. So I could have a Z prime, so an extra heavier cousin of the Z boson that has flavor changing coupling. So for instance, you have mu to E coupling, you spit out a Z prime, and then on the other side, I have E plus, E minus couplings. In this case, this contribution will be one loop suppressed, but the mu to 3E is going to be generated at 3-level, right? So it would be a completely different thing than the mu to E gamma. If so now we have much more variety. So one way of taking all this into account is by saying, okay, so if these new states are heavy, we can integrate them out and write on an effective description, an effective field theory description, so standard model EFT. There will be two types of operators that will describe this transition. So the mu to 3E transition will be described by either being generated by the dipole operator, so the same operator that generates mu to E gamma. So that's I take a mu and I convert it to an electron, and you speed of photon, it's dimension 6 when I include the electroweak structure. And it's chirality flipping. Right? It's exactly the same operator. So in this picture, it would be shrinking the n eta loop to a point corresponds to having an insertion of this dipole operator. The other set of operators are the 4 fermion operators. So I can have left-handed current coupling to a left-handed currents, and here I didn't put the flavor indices. So for instance, this would be mu to E current and then E to E current. So this will generate a decay of mu to 3E. For instance, it will be generated when you integrate out the Z prime at 3-level will generate operate like this if you only have left-handed couplings. If you only have right-handed coupling, you will end up with an operator in the second line. Again, I didn't write the flavor indices, so one of these will be a muon, the other one is an electron. So there's an IJ sitting in there. If you have both left and right, so left-handed and right-handed coupling of, let's say, the Z prime, then there's a third set of operators that you can write, which is left-handed currents coupling to the right-handed currents, and of course also the other two in this case. So you generate all of them if Z prime has both left-handed and right-handed couplings. All right, so once again, so there are two types of operators. The coupling of mu to is the question. Very good. Why the dimension 6? Let's see that I can annotate. Maybe if I stop sharing, I can get the annotate. No. Is there a way for me to annotate in this, Jim?
I'm not.
You're not sure.
On that floating bar at the top, right? When you're sharing, Isn't one of the
Yeah,
options annotate?
no, that's, yeah, it doesn't appear. It's, and also if I stop sharing, it doesn't give me the.
Yeah, no, I can't see anything.
It's okay. All right. I think, okay, I think I'm handicapped, so no annotation. Yeah, so the, yeah, maybe I can reuse the Lagrangians that I have. All right, that's good. I'll go way back now. I have a kinetic Lagrangian, and we can figure out dimensions from there. Here. No, here. All right, so from here, no? Okay, so how do I do the dimensions? Is so dimensions of the d4x, so the space-time, it's 1 over, so if I take a space-time variable, it's 1 over the mass. Right? So as soon as we know that, no? So 1 meter is the same as 1 over MeV. Right, so h bar c is 200 MeV times centimeters. Right, so now let's first figure out what the dimensions are for this, the Lagrangian. So if I integrate this over the full space-time d4x, so imagine that there's an integral sign in front, d4x, it will give me an action. So that's the dimensionless quantity that goes into the exponent when you write the path integral. No? So action is dimensionless. Lagrangian therefore has dimension in mass units of GeV to the 4. So d4x is g4 to the GeV to the minus 4. This is GeV to the 4. Okay. All right. So now let's look at figure out what the dimensions of the right-handed, the fermions is. No? So I have one derivative here. Derivative has ddx sitting there, so it's x downstairs. So this is a dimension GeV, or in other words, this is momentum as dimensions of GeV. So this will pick up a momentum. This whole thing needs to be dimension 4 in GeVs. So therefore, this is a dimension 3/2. Let's check. So this is mass dimension, so GeV, and I have 3/2 plus 3/2. So in total, I have dimension 4. So it's really, once you do a d4x, the action is dimensionless. All right. Okay, so let's now go back to where we were. These operators. For instance, let's see whether it makes sense here. Okay, I didn't do the photons. So this is 3/2. 3/2 is 3. There's one derivative in here, which is 1 mass dimension. The photon has to have the same dimension as the derivative because it sits in the covariant derivative. Now I have d mu plus g a mu. So f mu has dimension 2. So 3 plus 2 is dimension 5. There's one VEV from the Higgs. So this is dimension 6 operator. Right? Now, so that's why there's lambda squared downstairs. If you already are in the broken phase, I can ignore that this came from the Higgs. So this part here is just dimension 5. And then the prefactor will have a dimension which is 1 over GeV, which is also true. So I could just define this to be 1 over lambda here. No? But I split it up so that you can follow from where these factors came from. So there were several factors here. One came from the Higgs insertion, which you necessarily need because I have a left-handed lepton that is a gauge doublet. So there will be a Higgs insertion, a Higgs that will make it a left-handed gauge singlet. And then there's a loop factor, and then 2 powers of the new physics downstairs. All right, so it's dimension 6. when I include the Higgs. It's dimension 5 if I just look at the broken phase and I just look at this operator. Maybe that was the question. It's more. Good. All right. Okay, I think we were here. So now here, no. So this is dimension 5, but I didn't write the value of the Higgs, and these are dimension 6 operators. Now the important thing is that there are quite a few of them. No? So depending on what the new physics will be, there will be maybe more a bigger contribution from the dipole operator, or maybe there will be a bigger contribution from this the 4 fermion operators. And depending on what really the underlying new physics is, you will have maybe a relation between mu2 and mu2 gamma, or no relation. You could just be probing something completely different with the 2 probes. So let's say if we look at the dipole limit, so let's
sorry, Jure, I had another question here. So when we've been discussing the SMEFT with Javier, he pointed out that these U1 extensions, or the Z prime additional gauge bosons, they're quite constrained in the quark sector, at least because of mixing, right? So for if you add these Z primes, do those have to be preferentially coupling to leptons, or are you actually probing mass bounds much higher than we're probing with the mixing? So I was just wondering.
Okay, so I'm glad you asked this. So maybe I also say, actually, I'll maybe put a few more slides about the light Z primes, but I can say in words, and then we can go over maybe a little bit more, like some figures. So the thing is, okay, I didn't see what exactly Javier did after, but the problem with the Z prime in the quark sector is that the bounds, so in both cases, if you have a flavor changing transition, the bounds are very severe, okay? So the bounds are very severe, and depending exactly on what you do, it can be either from chaos or the leptons that you get the most important, like the stringent bound will depend on the couplings. And they are very severe bounds. So we're talking 10 to the 7 TeV or so, 10 to the 7 GeV probably. I have to check. I think 10 to the 7 GeV will be roughly where you'll have, let's say from KK bar mixing, you'll have a constraint on, let's say, order 1-ish couplings to these guys. So this will be, unless you have some special structure, you will be killed by KK bar mixing. Things can change if you have small couplings, but light guy. So talking 100 MeV. I mean, yeah. Okay, it's all in the details, but let me say that if we assume, for instance, that it's let's say if it comes from a gate symmetry, so that this Z prime is coming from a gate symmetry, you will, of course, have to have this gate symmetry anomaly free. All right, so I'll give you just a few numbers just to see that this will illustrate how constraining this thing is. No, so in general, let's say, so I know this counting because we just wrote the paper. It's about this. All right, so there's let's say you assume only standard model, but with right-handed neutrinos, you put in a U1 prime, so a U1 that will give you a Z prime. And you, let's say, demand that the gauge couplings, so the quantum numbers of the U1X are such that it's anomaly free and the ratios are not too big, that they are smaller than 10. Then there's about 20 million charge assignments that you can write. many. So it's many models that you could write. However, as soon as you switch on any pheno, meaning you look at the quark flavor bounds, this will go down to about 400. Right, so immediately most of the model are completely killed. There's nothing you can do now. Basically, no, it will be, you leave at 10 to the 7. So if you want to have some effects, let's say in G minus 2 of the muon, let's say that you want to explain this, you will end up with very few models that survive all the bounds, including the flavor changing neutral ones. So if you don't want to have any flavor, so the bounds, as soon as you switch on some flavor violation, you are dead, no? Basically, no? Okay, I'm mumbling a little bit. I don't know what exactly you asked.
But no, but that's why.
But that's the thing now.
I was thinking about how you correlate this against other observables, and what you're saying makes sense. But there's some very tight constraints already, and of course this is
exactly. So right,
yeah.
If you, for instance, if you want to, if you want to have an effect in the some observable, you need to make sure that these flavor violating transitions are not there. And maybe I'll give you an example tomorrow. It's a good point. I'll just we need a little bit of context, no? So you need to fix the couplings from somewhere. So as soon as you fix those couplings, we'll see. I'll just give you an example where you see that the bounds are really severe, and it depends on the details whether the leptons are most important or the quarks.
Okay.
So I think I'll give you two examples where one is important or the other. But yeah, they're very severe bounds. Hopefully tomorrow it will be more. We're kind of ground up today, so we're just looking at the transitions and asking how you measure it.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Sure. All right. Yeah. So so I said that there's a correlation between the mu2 and mu2 gamma if we say that one operator dominates this dipole. If this dipole operator dominates, then I have let's say mu2 transition when you split off the photon, and then you can couple to the electron current. So there will be an E plus E minus that gets split out from the photon. It's all controlled by the value of the same Wilson coefficient, the same strength, the same one Wilson coefficient, the same one operator gives me both transitions in this limit. So therefore, you can just do an integral over the phase space, and you'll get a factor that is alpha because you have an extra electromagnetic coupling between photon and the E plus E minus. The phase space will give me an extra 1 over 16 pi squared, so I get alpha over some pi, no? With some order one number. Okay, once you do the integral, you know it's just 3 here, not 4. That is naive expectation. The log of mu squared over me squared comes from the integral. So there is a from the integration of the phase space times the branching ratio of mu2 gamma. So branching ratio of mu2 is therefore calculable factor times branching ratio of mu2 gamma. So in other words, in this particular model, you will be probing the same Wilson coefficient, and you need to be more, your experiment should be more sensitive. So you should have better bounds in order to probe something new instead of mu2 gamma. However, of course, there are other models where you don't generate the Z prime or have the mu2 with a suppressed mu2 gamma. Okay. Now, another general comment is that in general, in new physics, all of these fermion and the 4 fermion and the the dipole operators will be present because they mix under the ionization group. So you can do a 1 or 2 loop contribution, and you will end up with non-zero contributions. So non-zero from practical point doesn't mean that it's super useful, but they are there. So there will be non-zero in general. All right, so how does the experiment look like? So it's kind of, morally it's a similar story than mu2e gamma, but the details are different. So we want a precise measurement of the energy of the outgoing particles. So therefore you use a mu plus that is stopped, so not mu minus, but mu plus that is stopped in the left frame, so that the muon and the left frame are coincide, and you don't have a bound effects from the binding to nucleus. Now, there's a big difference here, which is that unlike mu2e gamma, this is a 3-body decay. So you can't just search for a monoenergetic particle. And the maximal energy for each of these electron or positron is also mu/2, roughly. So when you have back-to-back, let's say positron and an E plus E minus pair going back-to-back, I don't know if I have a figure, yeah. So if they go back-to-back, let's say pick this guy, and they go back-to-back, you will reach the mu/half is the maximal energy. Now, how do you then distinguish from other backgrounds? For instance, we have now Standard Model process, which is exactly the same, but you also spit out 2 neutrinos, nu bar. So if you have 2 W's exchanged, then you will have this very like a pretty suppressed decay, but it's almost the same as the signal that you're searching for, except that there are 2 extra neutrinos, and you need to make sure that you don't have some missing energy that you're in your detector that you're mismeasuring. So what are the distinguishing features is there's a common vertex for all of these electrons and positrons. The energy need to sum up to the muon mass. If you have 2 neutrinos and you take the 3 charged particles, the energy will not sum up to the muon mass, except if the neutrinos are very soft. So this is a qualifier. So there will be a region of phase space where you will not be able to measure this precisely enough. So there will be a irreducible background from there. And then there's also the accidental. So just pick up 3 charged guys, and you can beat on those by having no common vertex, and there will be not coincidence in time also. All right, so what do you do with this irreducible Standard Model background? So you need a very precise measurement of the 2 positron and an electron measurement of energy, so they need to add up to the muon mass. If we look at the branching ratio, so this is a region where the neutrinos are very soft, is this. That's the end point where the mass of the visible part, so the energy of the visible particles is close to the muon mass. So that's here, no? So the 2 neutrinos are very soft. Sounds like a huge suppression, no? So if you measure this precisely, you can just ignore that there are still some mu2/3e nu bar decays. All right, so now if we convert this into what you actually need to measure, so let's look at this region, but convert into a different quantity. So integrate the branching ratio of mu2/3e nu bar over the missing energy and make a cut. So that's this E/max, means the maximal missing energy that you allow for to be present. If this is 1 MeV, so you allow for 1 MeV of missing energy to not be measured, so it still be present, there is a decay that is there. You will have a branching ratio for mu2/3e nu bar to be at 10⁻⁻17. All right, so this will be below the target. So the targets are sort of 10 to the minus 15, 16. So in other words, you need to be able to measure the energy within 1% or so, which is, as I understand, is experimentally challenging but possible. So there's a lot of, how you do this. Of course, there's a whole collaboration devoted to making sure that this is done. It's not an easy thing, but possible. All right. So present bounds are from a very long time ago. So this is from 1988, from Syndrome at PSI. It's 10 to the minus 12. And now the future measurement it's also at PSI mu3e. There are two phases. So the first phase aims at 2 times 10 to the minus 15. I couldn't find exactly the number, but 3 years of running and they're almost there. So I put wiggle line to 2025. You see, it's a huge improvement. Huh? So almost 3 orders of magnitude over this old measurement. Odd doesn't mean bad. It just means odd. It's a tough measurement. No? So it's not easy to get to these numbers. And then phase 2 will be the next phase. They will go all the way down to 10 to the minus 16. And now you really see that this irreducible background is getting important if you want to go there to this precision. All right. Okay, so the last transition we'll cover today is mu to E conversion. All right, so what is this? So it's kind of a peculiar thing, no? So because you need an extra ingredient, which is this nucleus. So you take a muon, you stop it, but now, unlike the previous two cases, you use mu minus, and then it gets bounded to the nucleus. So the mu to E conversion is a mu minus that converts to an electron, E minus, in the field of the nucleus, but without any neutrinos. So if you have neutrinos, that will be a standard model capture. So no neutrinos is crucial. You need to make sure that no neutrinos were emitted, and then you measure this electron going out. All right. All right. So the process is you take the mu minus from the beam, it stops in the target, and then it quickly forms a muonic atom. So it will kick out one of the electrons. This is a very quick process. And then you have a much longer lived muonic atom with a mu minus in the lower shell. And you're looking for a two-body kinematic. So you're looking at the mu minus goes to an E minus. So that's this on this side, this is bounded. No? And while on the right-hand side, I have a kicked nucleus with the rest of the atom and an electron. So it's basically a two-body kinematics where the energy of the electron going out is muon mass minus the binding energy. No? So that was basically the initial state, no? Mu minus the binding energy, and then minus the kinetic energy of the nucleon. So mu here is I put the mu to denote the momentum of the electron. So that's the kinetic energy of the nucleus that has the same momentum as the electron, right? So this is basically at the end point so it's basically the muon mass with small correction. This binding energy depends on the nucleus, so this will differ from one nucleus to the other. It goes as z squared alpha squared mu over 2. And then there's, this kinetic energy. All right, so let's say if you look at the aluminum, which is used in the mu to E experiment, we're talking 104.96 MeV. So basically the muon mass, which is very different from before, where the electron or the positron was at half the muon mass, right? Now, if we look at the new physics that will induce this transition, there's quite a zoo of possible effects. So again, let's go into the standard model EFT. So heavy new physics, and we'll just look at the operators. So one is you can have a dipole operator. You can, couple mu to E with the nucleus, or all the 4 fermion operators that now have couplings to quarks. So if I have a muon on the left-hand side goes to an electron. I didn't put the indices, the Flavour indices, and a coupling to the quark current. And then there are different choices. The tau E are the isospin, so the SE2 generators. You see there's a bunch of operators that you can write down, also tensor currents. All right, so what that means is that there's a lot of different contributions, which is good, no? Because you will probe you can probe quite a large set of new physics models. On the theory side, when you're computing the rates, there is a complication that now you have to deal with nuclear physics. So the matrix elements needs to be evaluated. You need to, in order to make a prediction, you need to evaluate the matrix element of this quark current sandwiched inside the nucleus. Some of them are easy, which is this vector currents. That's easy. Some of them are very tough. These are these tensor currents. I mean, the matrix elements are poorly known both on the nucleon level and then on the nuclear level. Also, the targets that are being used are heavier because you gain some coherent factors sometimes. This will go as some number of nucleons that you have there squared in the amplitude. Sorry, in the transition rate. So there are what people in the nuclear community would say first principle calculation, where you start with the nuclear potentials that are measured or tuned to the Carr perturbation theory, and then really solve a large set of Hartree-Fock states. This is not done. You need to use some approximations, like a mean field approximation, effectively. So that just means that the predictions have error bars, but the main message is still there, no? So even though the prediction for the actual rate maybe have a factor of 2 uncertainty in some cases, if you see an event experimentally, it's new physics. Now the interpretation maybe will require some work and will have uncertainties. But the fact that you discovered a new physics, if you see a mu to E conversion, it's still true. The standard model rate is very small for this process, so no neutrinos. All right, so it gets more complicated, but the main message now why you should do this experimentally is still there. All right, so how are these results quoted? They're quoted in a ratio. So there is a mu to E conversion rate. So the rate for mu to E conversion is then normalized with the nuclear capture rate. So you could do a standard model version of it where you have mu to a neutron plus nu mu. This would be just a W exchange. Now you need to do another W exchange to get the electron also, right? And you'll have another neutrino, right? So that's the capture rate. You capture a muon, and then this will be the standard model background. This is the nuclear capture rate, and you sum all of different nuclear captures. So that's the sum of all the standard model nuclear captures of the muon, and you divide the two. So these rates, so the reason why this is done is that at least some of the theoretical uncertainties cancel in this rate. So it's a better prediction. And this is either denoted as R mu E or this capture rate mu n to en. So that's what these numbers that I will show next mean. All right, so the experimentally, the mu to E conversion has a big advantage over the previous two. Let's say the mu to E gamma, because the mu to E line, so we're searching for an electron line, which is basically at the muon mass up to this small binding energy and the kinetic energy correction. So we're down here. So big, you have a big energy that is being deposited in the electrons, which means that the standard model background, which is muon to electron nu E decay in the orbit, that's the main background, which is this green line, and the data from the twist collaboration are these red points, is super suppressed. It's very suppressed. While before mu to E gamma, we were sitting here, no? So just as a comparison, no? It's not the same process, but just to guide the eye, no? So before we had to measure something which was here. Now you're at the very edge, very, very edge. All right. So that's the gain, is that you can suppress this intrinsic background if you make a very good measurement of the outgoing electron. All right. Okay. So what are the present bounds? So the syndrome made two measurements. In 93 was the transitions on titanium, and 2006 were on gold. They're at the 10 to the 12 level, so 7 times 10 to the minus 13. There's sort of imminent future, which is a transition on carbon. That's the DME experiment in Japan. Its target is, factor of, or maybe almost an order of magnitude improvement, and then another factor of a few when you have silicon carbon. And then the future, most of all of this experiment, they're using aluminum targets. The phase 1, 10 to the minus 15 for Comet. Comet is in J Park, so Japan. Mu to E and Comet phase 2 are the level 10 to the minus 17, and then mu to E, or it's talking about the next phase already, that will be minus 10 to the minus 18, and the Comet has also a successor that in right prism, it's far in the future. So you see, there's a, we're talking 5 orders of magnitude improvements in the rates in the next, I don't know, 15 years or so. Taking advantage of this experimental fact that you can have an electron at the very edge of the kinematically allowed region. All right, so let me now go back a little bit and say, comparing these 3 modes, so these 3 observables, let's see what we are probing. So there's now, I wrote the Smith operators. So these are the 2 dipole operators. That's the Higgs, phi is the Higgs, the W, which is a triplet of Sc2L, and the B mu, the hypercharge dipole. They combine to the photonic one once you break the electric symmetry. And then there's color-coded which observables probe which operators. So mu to E gamma I put in blue, mu to 3E is in red, mu to E conversion is in green. So all 3 are sensitive to the dipole operators. And then depending on whether it's mu to 3E or mu to E, these operators split. And okay, I could have put also mu to E conversion here. The main message of this color coding is that, A, there are many operators, so you probe, many different types of new physics. And these probes are complementary, so they probe really different things. There's one common operator that will contribute to all of them. All right, so let's say if we take, so that's, on on one way, an interesting comparison, but it can be also misleading. So if you're dominated by the mu to E gamma, I think it's good to look at how sensitive the experiments are right now. So that's what's plotted here. No? So you take the branching ratio of mu to E gamma, it will predict the mu to 3E if you assume that the dipole operator dominates. That's the one that we looked at. There's a similar prediction for mu to E conversion, where the branching ratio of mu to E gamma will then also predict how big the mu to E conversion rate should be if the dipole operator dominates. Now, the present bounds are plotted here in the triangle for the three directions. So mu to E gamma, mu to 3E, mu to E conversion, assuming the dipole moment dominates. So that's this red is the present, the bound on the Wilson coefficient. With the future experiments planned, there will be a modest jump in mu to E gamma, but big jumps in mu to 3E and mu to E conversion. And if this dipole moment operator dominates, there basically will be probing the same value. So you'll have the same sensitivity between these three probes for this particular case, the simplified case of one dipole. All right, so I think I'm almost perfectly timed. So that's the upshot of what we did today. So there are several different probes in the radiative mu decays. We can probe different types of mu physics. I think I try to impress this on you. Now you can do the opposite as well. If you find any physics in all three probes, you can disentangle at least partially what you're seeing. And there is really impressive experimental progress being projected there. All right, so let's stop here, and then tomorrow we continue with the tau decays and all the other probes.
Thanks a lot, Jure. So yeah, I think are there any immediate questions, or you know, there'll be the opportunity with the tutorial tomorrow as well to ask some questions, and then Jure will be back in the evening for his final two lectures. But it's end of the day for us here. We're flagging, I think. But no, it's very nice. It's rare that we hear about these muon experiments. You know, there's no Indian involvement in any of these, so it's very.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that nobody was covering it experimentally, so I thought I put some words there.
Jim, can I ask a quick question?
Sure, Namit.
It's a simplified version of what I'm able to understand.
Hi, Jure. One quick question. What are the examples of concrete models where dipole dominance limit holds? Are there any concrete examples?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, you need to make sure that okay. The main problem is forbidding the box diagrams. No? So you need to make sure that you'll make the box diagram small.
Yes.
So the way you would, so the way you would do this is, maybe I go back. I had this figure. So it will play. Okay, here we are. No? So you want to make sure that the coupling of the electron to these states is small. So you'll have it here and here. I don't know, you see my cursor, right? Do you see my cursor?
No, I was just wondering whether this, given the constraints or given the construction of some concrete model, does it naturally arise in some popular models that we study? Or is it some
So the problem is that you will like in any model. I'm not sure it's correct. So the basically in any model you will generate all these operators, no? Because they are all dimension 6. Okay.
Right.
Then I think it depends on the detail. So let me walk you over this, what is required. So there's a limit of this model here, which is just a model of this is the so-called scotogenic neutrino mass models.
Okay.
So yeah, so what you need to have is have the mu to the sterile coupling be parametrically bigger than the sterile to the electron. You see, because then you will pay a price here. So you have 3 couplings to electrons, but only one coupling of muon. So you will suppress the box diagram, but you will have a dipole. So then the dipole will dominate. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the same. Okay, there are more examples. You know, like you could just switch on the flavor violating couplings, for instance. Like you could have, you know, you will have mu tau e, okay, and then again, you will pay a big price here.
But at the muon scale, tau would have been integrated out. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So one doesn't know how it will, what it will transpire into, depending on the different vertices and strengths that we put there.
Yeah, so I mean, like the general statement is that you like completely forbidding the 4 fermion operators is impossible because you mix. But the details matter, no? Because numerically it can be small.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. So I don't see anything else in the chat. Thanks a lot, Jure, and we'll speak to you tomorrow.